The chamber was already tense when Jasmine Crockett stepped forward, clutching a heavy black briefcase as though it contained a nation's fate. Without hesitation, she declared, "Inside are the records that prove Donald Trump funneled secret bank transfers directly to Vladimir Putin." The room fractured instantly. Allies of Trump erupted with shouts of "fraud! Fake!" while reporters rushed to switch their feeds to live broadcast. The silence of seconds was shattered into chaos. I describe how the cameras zoomed in on Crockett's calm expression. Her eyes never blinked, her voice cut through the uproar. She laid the briefcase on the table, unlocked it with a sharp metallic click, and pulled out the first document. "Here," she said, holding it high so the chamber could see, "are the financial statements that show transfers from Trump-linked companies to Kremlin-controlled accounts." Trump shouted, "This is a total fabrication." His fists slammed the wooden bench before him, but his voice cracked under pressure. He tried to smile, but sweat betrayed him. The audience gasped as Crockett read aloud the figures. Millions moved in carefully disguised channels, converted into offshore currencies, and routed through Moscow. The words hung in the air like thunder. Reporters scribbled frantically. Phones buzzed with alerts. Headlines were already forming. "Crockett unveils damning evidence." The sound of clicking cameras became a drumbeat. Yet Crockett didn't stop. She raised her voice over the noise. "You paid in. You earned it. It's your money, and he gave it away to Putin." The rhetorical anchor slammed into the chamber like a gavel. For a moment, the air seemed to collapse inward. Trump's defenders screamed accusations of treason against her, but their shouts sounded hollow, like echoes in a collapsing tunnel. Crockett placed the documents on the desk in a neat stack, her composure almost surgical. The result of this opening strike was undeniable. The chamber was no longer debating, but spiraling into panic. Trump's figure looked smaller, his authority cracked. And this was only the first revelation. The promise of worse to come made the tension unbearable. As the first stack of documents landed on the table, the chamber filled with a relentless roar. It did not fade for even a moment. Crockett wasted no time. She pulled out a new folder marked in red ink. Confidential correspondence. Her hands remained steady, though the air carried the thunder of a political storm. She opened the file and began reading excerpts from the emails. "Here it is," she declared. "Letters exchanged between Trump's private office and Kremlin intermediaries." Phrases like strategic concessions and mutual benefits appear again and again. The chamber froze. I describe how each word struck the listeners like a hammer. These were no longer rumors or speculation. These were written agreements set in black and white, sealed in correspondence. Trump shouted, "Lies! She is reading forgeries!" His voice cracked, but the authority he once commanded had evaporated. Cameras zoomed in on every distorted word, every twitch of anger on his face. His allies tried to drown the uproar, but a sea of journalists raised their microphones higher, their voices piercing through the chaos. Crockett lifted her gaze, her tone sharp yet composed. "These words were not written by me. They came from your desk, from your people, and they carry your shadow, Mr. Trump." The effect was electric. Reporters erupted into whispers and furious typing, sending alerts across the globe. Screens outside the chamber lit up with breaking banners. "Crockett unveils secret Trump-Putin letters." Inside, the air thickened to the point of suffocation. Some members leaned forward in disbelief. Others pressed back into their seats as though trying to escape the evidence itself. Trump slammed the desk again. "Witch hunt! This is Russia hoax 2.0!" But his words echoed weaker than before, drowned beneath the relentless flash of cameras. Crockett stacked the letters neatly, letting the silence that followed weigh like a verdict. The local result was clear. The chamber was no longer simply chaotic, it was spiraling toward collapse. Every revelation tightened the vice, and still the sense lingered. The worst was yet to come. The uproar did not settle. Instead, it shifted into a fever pitch as Crockett reached again into the briefcase. This time, she withdrew a heavier dossier, pages bound together with official seals. The cameras caught the golden stamp of a European bank. She raised it high, letting the emblem gleam beneath the chamber lights. "These," Crockett announced, "are verified statements from international banks. They track the exact routes of Trump's secret transfers, from shell companies in the Caribbean through intermediaries in Cyprus, and finally into accounts directly tied to Vladimir Putin's inner circle. Her words rang with surgical precision. Trump collapsed back into his chair, his face pale, his jaw trembling. He tried to mutter, "No, this can't—" But his voice faltered. For the first time, the chamber witnessed not the roaring showman, but a man cornered by his own shadows. I describe how the documents passed hand to hand among stunned lawmakers. Some clutched their heads, others whispered in disbelief. The weight of international verification crushed the last refugee of denial. Reporters outside the chamber shouted updates into their microphones. "Crockett links Trump's money trail directly to Moscow." Trump suddenly forced himself upright, slamming his fist against the table. "It's a setup!" he screamed. "Foreign lies! They want to destroy me because I fought for America!" His words cracked, torn between defiance and desperation. His allies tried to cheer him on, but their voices trembled, lacking the fire they once carried. Crockett leaned forward, her tone sharp as glass. "You didn't fight for America. You sold it, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, until Putin held the receipts." The chamber gasped, the line slicing like a blade. Even across the airwaves, anchors on live television repeated the phrase instantly, imprinting it as the headline of the hour. The symbolism was undeniable. America's sovereignty reduced to transactions, exposed before the nation and the world. The immediate result of this blow was devastating. Trump's collapse was no longer just physical. It was political, moral, symbolic. And yet, Crockett's eyes told everyone present, this was still not the final strike. The silence broke like glass when Crockett placed the European bank dossier onto the table and reached for yet another file. This one bore the seal of a U.S. Treasury investigation. The room stiffened. Even seasoned lawmakers leaned forward, realizing that what came next could not be dismissed as foreign fabrication. "These documents," she declared, "are compiled by American officials. Internal memoranda, flagged transactions, and red alerts ignored by the Trump administration." She lifted the first page, reading aloud with deliberate clarity. "Suspicious transfer exceeding $5 million, routed through a subsidiary tied to Trump Organization, destination, Moscow." The words reverberated like a judge's sentence. Trump shouted, "This is deep state sabotage. They planted those files." His voice was hoarse, but it only emphasized the desperation in his tone. The cameras magnified his reddened face, sweat dripping down his temple. His hands trembled as he pointed across the chamber. "They're traitors! Every one of them!" I describe how members of Congress began murmuring to each other, some recoiling, others whispering frantically into phones. The reporters' voices outside rose into a crescendo. Crockett unveils Treasury documents implicating Trump in Russian transfers. The story was snowballing in real time, rolling from one newsroom to another like an avalanche. Crockett continued unfazed, her voice unwavering. "This is not Europe. This is not hearsay. This is the United States Treasury, your own government, sounding alarms you chose to bury." She let the pause drag, letting the chamber sink into the gravity of her words. The contrast was unmistakable. On one side stood Crockett, calm, armed with evidence, each revelation sharper than the last. On the other, Trump, cornered, sweating, shaking, his defenses crumbling in front of the nation. The cameras did not just record, they judged. Then came the symbolic dagger. Crockett held up a final page and read, "Direct reference, funds linked to personal account, authorization, signature required." And there, visible for all to see, was the unmistakable scrawl of Trump's own hand. The chamber erupted, gasps, shouts, the clamor of disbelief. Trump lurched forward, his knees buckling, and aides scrambled to steady him. He collapsed back into his chair, pale and dazed. Reporters cried into their microphones, "Trump collapses as signature revealed." The local result was seismic. The chamber was no longer debating guilt or innocence. It was witnessing the physical and political breakdown of a former president. And yet, the air held one chilling certainty. Crockett had not yet played her final card. The chamber seemed frozen in time after Trump slumped into his chair. The image of his trembling hand, the sweat streaking down his cheek, had already become the centerpiece of every live broadcast. Yet Jasmine Crockett did not stop. She stepped closer to the microphone, her calm presence cutting through the chaos. "This is only the beginning," she said, her voice steady but merciless. She held up another folder, thicker, bound with a blue ribbon marked Private Communications. The sight alone drew gasps. I describe how television anchors whispered live on air. Another file. There's still more. The anticipation crackled like static. Crockett opened the folder and revealed a series of transcripts. "These are phone call records," she announced. "Conversations between Trump's aides and Russian oligarchs. Direct mentions of payments, promises, and a phrase repeated over and over. The deal is secure." Her words carved through the chamber like iron. Trump forced himself upright, his voice trembling with rage. "Illegitimate, stolen records. None of this is admissible." But his protests were drowned in the sound of reporters reading the quotes aloud to their cameras. For the first time, Trump's voice was not amplified, but swallowed by evidence, by disbelief, by the sheer tide of exposure. Crockett turned a page and continued reading. "Listen to this. Trump has approved the transfers. The Kremlin acknowledges receipt. Future concessions expected. These are not rumors. These are not interpretations. These are his people, his words, his orders." She let the silence linger before repeating with precision. "Approved, transfers, receipt." The repetition struck like a hammer, anchoring itself into the chamber's collective memory. I described the faces in the audience, senators holding their breath, aides frantically scribbling notes, some refusing to meet each other's eyes. The press gallery looked like a sea of glowing screens as journalists typed furiously, their headlines already shaping the night. "Crockett ties Trump to Kremlin with call transcripts." Trump suddenly staggered forward, gripping the desk with both hands. His voice cracked into a scream. "You're destroying America with lies! This is treason!" But his words no longer held command. They hung limp, exposed, drained of conviction. His own allies avoided his gaze, their silence more damning than any shout. Crockett pressed further, her tone sharp, unyielding. "The American people deserve truth, not excuses, not diversions. This is betrayal written in ink, spoken on the phone, carried in your own voice." She tapped the papers against the desk, the sound echoing like a gavel. The symbolic weight crushed the chamber. It was not just a political scandal unfolding. It was the image of power unraveling live before millions. The man who once demanded loyalty stood alone, drowning beneath the tide of his own secrets. The result was unmistakable. Trump was no longer merely fighting for his reputation. He was fighting to breathe in a storm of evidence too heavy to deny. Yet the look in Crockett's eyes revealed the unspoken truth. She was saving her sharpest weapon for last. The noise in the chamber rose to a fevered pitch. Senators shouted over each other, aides ran back and forth carrying hurried notes, and journalists leaned so far over the balcony railings that security had to hold them back. The world was watching in real time as the storm grew darker. Yet in the eye of that storm stood Jasmine Crockett, unflinching, deliberate, methodical. She raised her hand, and the room, though restless, slowly quieted. "There is one more layer," she said, her voice slicing through the clamor. She pulled from the briefcase a thick envelope stamped with the insignia of a well-known auditing firm. The seal had been broken only minutes before, live, under the eyes of the committee. She held it aloft. "These are audit trails," Crockett announced. "Forensic accounting that links Trump's shell corporations directly to Kremlin-owned enterprises. Not speculation, not politics, numbers, transfers, names, dates." She emphasized each word, and the chamber hung on them like a jury awaiting a verdict. The reporters erupted again, shouting into microphones, relaying the bombshell to viewers around the globe. I describe how the split screens on live television lit up. On one side, Crockett calmly reading the documents. On the other, Trump shaking, pale, sweat soaking his collar. The contrast itself was devastating. Trump bellowed, his voice cracking, "These firms are corrupt, paid off. You're all conspiring." He slammed his hand on the desk, but the sound was weaker now, more desperate than defiant. His posture slouched, his breath heavy. The once towering figure looked diminished, a man shrinking in front of the nation he once commanded. Crockett unfolded the first page of the audit. Her eyes moved down the columns, then she began to read. Transaction, January 23rd. Amount, $7 million. Origin, Trump Development Holdings. Destination, Rosenergo Invest, Moscow. The words reverberated across the chamber, echoed by anchors repeating them instantly on national television. Gasps filled the room. I describe how one senator dropped his pen, another covered her face with her hand, unable to process the magnitude. Allies of Trump whispered frantically, their voices low but visible on camera, their panic impossible to hide. Crockett turned another page. Transaction, February 11th. Amount, $9 million. Origin, Trump Luxury Enterprises. Destination, Baltic Intermediary, linked to Kremlin funds. She looked up, her eyes piercing the chamber. This is a pattern. This is not coincidence. This is collusion written in the language of money. Trump tried to rise, but his knees buckled. Aides rushed to his side, holding him upright. She's lying. This is fraud, he gasped, but his voice was drowned by the noise of journalists shouting headlines into their phones. Audit proves direct Trump-Putin transfers. The atmosphere inside the chamber grew suffocating. Even Republicans who had stood firmly behind him minutes before now leaned back, their silence louder than any defense. Their faces betrayed doubt, calculation, fear. Some avoided cameras entirely, staring down at their shoes as if ashamed to be seen. Crockett's voice rose again, sharper, striking like steel. You told the American people you were fighting for them, but the money says otherwise. The money tells the truth. You paid in. You earned it, and he gave it away. She let the repetition ring, anchoring itself into the memory of every listener. I describe how the symbolism overtook the facts themselves. The briefcase on the table no longer seemed like leather and steel. It had become Pandora's box, spilling out corruption too vast to ignore. The chamber was not just shaken, it was breaking. And then Crockett leaned forward, her final words in this round landing with lethal precision. Mr. Trump, you didn't just betray your office. You auctioned your country to the highest bidder, and you signed the bill of sale yourself. The chamber exploded. Reporters shouted. Senators cried out. The public gallery rose in disbelief. Outside, across the nation, millions stared at their screens in shock. Trump slumped once more into his chair, his body shuddering, his defenses shattered. The immediate result was more than political. It was personal, physical, existential. Trump was no longer the master of the room. He was its prisoner, caged by evidence and watched by the world. And still, the air thickened with a single terrifying promise. Crockett had yet to unleash the final, irreversible blow.